Hello. It's really great to be here in Victoria. I was just joking with somebody. I've been around the last couple of days that I kind of forget where I am now and again, but I can never forget Royal Roads, of course. So it's great to be back here. I see a lot of people I know. I see some people I don't know. So I'm going to start by just letting you know who I am. I was for 12 years, the team coach for the Faculty of Management. So when I started, come on in. When I started 12 years ago, in particular the MBA program recognized that come on and join one of these tables here, please, because I'm going to get you to participate with people at a table. Come on and sit down. They realized that the process that we subject our students to, especially during our residencies, but also in the online environment, puts a lot of challenge on our students. And the experience of trying to integrate with essentially 4 or 5 different strangers in a very short period of time under a high level of stress creates some fallout. And so what happens, and what we recognized, and this seems to be true across the spectrum, is that the student experience of teamwork goes a long ways towards defining their experience of Royal Roads. Lousy team, lousy program is often, my team was horrible, I didn't get the support, this program doesn't care, whatever, that's often. Or I had an awesome team experience, it was great, it was fantastic, I learned so much, everybody should do this. So either end of the spectrum, there's a significant impact on their perception of Royal Roads, in particular their program, as related to that. And those that had a negative experience, for some of them, it was extremely damaging. The pressures that they are put under, and you even get dynamics where you get bullying and happening within teams, and you get frustration and stress and challenge. So, and it's not all bad, obviously. A lot of it's very, very good, but on that difficult side, it can be very, very difficult. And so the Faculty of Management, they were known then as the School of Business, decided they needed to get some support. So they hired me, and I came in here and I was like, okay. And my first group was MBAs. Trish Dick here is the MBA team coach. She took over for me, so she'll understand what this is like. I got up in front of these MBA students, and they were all older than me and all more experienced than me. And I got out there and go, what could I possibly say to these group of people that they don't already know? So I put some team theory up there and talked about team theory and did some team building. 12 years later, I learned a lot and changed how I was approaching that, and have done a lot of different things, and the work of team coach has been very different. It expanded to all of the Faculty of Management programs, and now it's expanding to the extent that we're able to, all the programs within Royal Roads. And now that's not going to happen overnight, but it's a process that's in place, and I'm sure Sarah can talk more about that. By the way, it's Sarah Chettelberg, by the way, who heads the team coaching program at Royal Roads now, so I just want to acknowledge that. So if you have questions about the Royal Roads support for teamwork, then she would be the person to talk about. I'm not here at Royal Roads anymore. I'm now working for Interior Health as an organizational development consultant. The reason I did that was really I developed a lot of theories and ideas about what happens in teamwork, and I wanted to find out if it actually worked in the real world as opposed to just the academic world. And lo and behold, human behavior is pretty much the same everywhere you are, whether it's an academic team, a work team, a sports team, it really doesn't matter. I've run into more or less the same dynamics everywhere I've gone. So that experience helped me to understand that there were some consistent factors that impact how teams work. I wrote a book. I'm not here to plug the book, but I wrote a book called The Keys to Collaboration. If you read between the lines, it really is a description of everything I've learned when I was a team coach here at Royal Roads. So it really compiled a lot of that information into how teams work. And the teams that you're dealing with here are a particular subset of teamwork. They're a self-directed project management team. So that's a different team than a lot of teams. It's different than the teams you probably work on here, where you have a dean or a program manager or a supervisor or a boss of some sort, and you work for them. Faculty teams are a little bit different. They're a bit more egalitarian than a lot of organizations, but they're a slightly different dynamic. Self-directed project management teams have their own unique challenges, and if you add the word virtual in front of that, you've got the hardest team there is. There are no teams that are harder than a self-directed virtual project management team, because there is no leadership, there is no structure, there's nothing really that supports that team other than, here you go, you're a team, and any support that comes out of that has to be added on and developed, and that's partly why we have the team coach role. So what I'm here today to talk about is the student experience of teamwork. I actually, come on in, no worries. I intentionally did not build an agenda for today. And it's only partly because I'm lazy, but it's also partly because I could talk to you for 2 hours without a whole lot of problem. But what's the point of talking to you about things that you don't necessarily want to hear? So what I really like to do is to start this off, I'm going to ask you, and I'm going to do an exercise that allows you to do that, to tell me what you would like to hear about. What would be useful for you to know about the student experience of teamwork and teamwork in general if you go beyond that, but my primary focus will be on that student experience piece because I think it's so important. Once I've done that, I'm going to record the different points that you come up with. We'll do a little vote. It won't take very long. I've got sticky dots. No facilitator can do his job without sticky dots. So I've got some of those. Once you tell me what you want to hear about, then we'll talk about it. So that's kind of what I'm going to do today to make sure that whatever I'm saying is relevant to you and what you're doing and your lived experience of working with teams. So that's how I like to start things off. So I'm going to give you, I'm thinking probably 3 to 5 minutes anyhow, right around that, within your tables. So I'm going to ask each table to talk to each other and talk about what would you like to hear about today, what would be useful for you, what's a good use of your time in the 45, 50 minutes that we have together. If there are themes or common things that come together, then list that. Make a list, and then I'm going to go from table to table, and we'll put up here the topics that you'd like to cover, and then we'll create our agenda. So please begin. That's unethical. You didn't ask.
Well, they're just less mature, right? They're early 20s, so they've got less mature. They don't have a program experience. And they haven't had as much
We've gone through for a
I understand. They might have an advantage. Yeah, I do know that my son is 17.
what other dynamics are very going on. What other besides concert things, what else does it mean?
Social media.
It's not really
Yes.
Yes.
Well, the team needs someone to fulfill leadership functions. That doesn't mean to do the individual role or function of that. So it's coordinating, managing, facilitating. So there's functional leadership roles that teams need to have. But it doesn't need to all be invested.
beyond the obvious.
Get children, look at dynamics. There's not much time, you know.
Okay, so I'd like to hear from, I'm just going to go table to table. I'm going to ask each table to give me one item. I'm going to ask each table to give me one item off their list. I'll do a couple of rounds and then we'll create our list of agenda items and we'll go from there. So let's start with this table right over here.
What to do if things don't work?
No. What techniques have you tried that
didn't work.
Oh,
So that we don't have to make the same mistakes.
well, we only have 45 minutes. Okay, this table here.
Oh, we talked about so many things. We have buy-in from students, managing conflict.
You only get one
We only
right
get
now.
one.
I'll come back around.
So let's make that one, managing conflict, and
We'll get back to that maybe. Here, this table here.
What is it?
Sure. I think we covered a variety of topics. One thing that is important to me is a framework. I'm talking about
framework for.
undergraduates. So undergraduates working in teams, if there were 3 things that we were to say to them is really, really important. So one of the things we talked about was, do teams need a leader? The answer is yes. That might be.
Just for your context, he asked this question, I heard it and said, yes. Yes, they do. But what I said was that what they need is not necessarily a single individual leader who is the boss, but rather there are certain leadership functions that need to be fulfilled for a team to be successful, but it doesn't necessarily need to be invested in an individual.
So what are the basics for success? You know, if you're going to guide undergraduates on what they absolutely must attend to as a team to be successful, what would they be? Yeah.
I've got 2 from the online group so far. One is strategies for helping teams to work effectively. And the other one is, what are effective strategies to rotate leadership opportunities within groups?
Strategies for.
Helping teams work effectively, or to work effectively.
Is that kind of the same as keys for success?
It could be.
Okay, let's leave that one open for now.
The other one is actually totally different from this. It is rotating leadership opportunities.
Okay.
How to do that.
Okay. Okay. This table here.
So one that I don't think is up there yet is looking at more effective approaches to assessment within teams, particularly students who, and going back to a little bit to the buy-in and the accountability piece.
Yeah, that accountability piece is huge. I'll get back to you in a second.
What can we do to help people understand the importance of working in teams beyond the obvious? So especially the international students who aren't used to peer learning, who see that the only person really who should be teaching them is the instructor.
Okay. I'm going to put in brackets ESL, although the answer is actually the same, but the context is different.
We talked about all these things too, and I guess to add to the list, we'd like to capitalize on your experience here at Royal Roads and understand what's unique about the team environment here. What are the standout elements of the team that can be expected of our students here?
Okay. One more and then I can do another round.
Okay, so we've got a question here about how do we effectively affect the I am in control person within an otherwise effective team?
I'm going to call that dealing with type A. Because I think you all know what that's like. Okay, I'm going to just do another quick round and see what we've got. So far I can cover all of these very, very, probably within the time we've got, but let's see what else there is. So this table here, do you have another one? I cut you off after one, so now you got another opportunity.
yes, we want to put buy-in up there, buy-in from students.
Is that part of understanding the why?
Could be, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
We have one more here. It's about integrating team coaching to the process. How do we best do that?
Could we add one more?
Sure, why not?
Okay, so the relationship between curriculum and building team skills.
Okay. Here.
Well, I'm kind of curious about team size. We're using the word team here as if it was a set number.
Yeah.
How big a team can you have and still have it function effectively?
I'll answer that for you right now.
Okay.
4 to 6.
Really?
That's the magic number. 4, you start to get vulnerable. If somebody leaves, you're down to 3. Anything above 6, it's really difficult to integrate the different perspectives. In the real world, 8 is probably the cap, but for a student team, I put it at 6. But we'll get into that later, but I can answer that one really fast, and then we'll go on.
I think this maybe integrates a couple up there, but what specifically can instructors do to set up good team experiences?
Okay. You got another one for me?
I think those are.
You good? You're good? You're good?
Oh, no, we got one more.
Okay.
How do we get quicker resolutions?
As in conflict resolution?
Yeah, exactly, yeah, the process is quite drawn out. We find the students tend to say, oh, we just go with it till the end of the semester, or we get new teams anyway. So for them to have faith in the system, there has to be quicker resolutions.
Okay. Yes.
How about the effectiveness of team charters?
Okay. Come on up, everybody. Let's do this quick as we can, because I don't think I can talk about all of this in the time that we have allotted. So I'm actually going to spend 2 minutes giving you all sticky dots. Put a dot next to what you'd like to do. Please, let's make this fast. If you don't feel like you need to put a sticky dot up, you don't have to, but I'll cover as many as I can, but I want to prioritize them a little bit so I can make sure I get to the good stuff. 1 dot. You get 1 dot. Not per team, not per table, 1 dot per person. Okay. Oh, you've given her a surrogate dot placing task? Wow.
Yeah, the whole leadership thing.
Yeah, that's what we call informal leadership. Tammy, do you have anything that they want to, is there anything on the online land that, in terms of priorities?
No, there was some.
Okay. More dots. So let's, you're holding up progress there, lady. Get a move on.
Thank you, Lane.
The why, understanding the why. Yes, you can have it.
Or take a picture.
You can have it.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Oh, we got one more. Okay. Okay. So our winner by a slight margin is managing conflict, so I'm going to start with that. First of all, I want to frame this in the context of conflict is a good thing. In fact, you want your teams to have conflict. The reason you want them to have conflict is because by challenging each other's ideas, by pushing the envelope, by asking them to go to that level where you're having disagreement, they get a much wider spectrum of ideation. And also, if they come up with a concept as a team, ultimately, as a student, you have to be able to prove your hypothesis. If you say, I recommend company ABC, or we think this is the best way to deal with this disaster, or whatever your program is, whatever the focus is, if you're asking them a question, they're going to have to propose something, and they need to be able to provide evidence that supports why they think it's a good idea. If they don't challenge each other, they don't generate that kind of evidence, because they're not pushing each other to look for where the flaws, where the holes, what's wrong with this idea. Right? So first of all, conflict is important. It needs to be normalized. It needs to be the right kind of conflict. That is, we're disagreeing about the content. We're not disagreeing as a personal thing. So being able to frame it in that perspective is saying conflict is a necessary thing. If you're personalizing it, then we need to talk about that. And that often, a hallmark of Res 1, because that's where most of the conflict occurs, is insecurity and fear. Did I pick the right program? Am I as good as all these other people in the room? Can I do the work? People handle their fear differently. Some people withdraw and become passive. Some people become aggressive, and there's everything in between. So oftentimes a lot of that conflict is fear-based. I don't think you're good enough. You're going to affect my grade. I'm going to get a bad grade, and this team is going to sink me. That's another kind of fear that goes on. When people have that fear, they start to try and manage each other. That also creates conflict. So understanding there's a lot of dynamics that cause conflict within a team. Most of it is good conflict. And some of it, of course, is not. And so how do you deal with as an instructor, if somebody's team is coming to you saying, we're blowing up, things aren't working, what are we going to do? Then you have to start to peel the onion and figure out what's going on. Is this the right kind of conflict gone bad or the wrong kind of conflict? And how are you going to manage it? So that's the first. I just want to make sure we all understand that conflict is a good thing and it should be normalized, and it needs to be within the range of control, that, as in they're able to manage it and it's not damaging in themselves. The second thing to remember, and especially managing conflict for quick resolution, where they are in the assignment cycle is probably the most important thing to keep in mind. So if you have an assignment that's due tomorrow, do you want to spend an hour resolving the conflict and the disagreements you're having with your teammates, or do you want to get to work and finish your assignment? You want to get the assignment done, right? The biggest priority and the biggest fear is we're not going to be able to do this. So when I deal with a team that's in extreme conflict and they've got a deadline and they're running up against that deadline, the first thing I try to do is create some normalization in the relationship so they're not angry at each other, and create some stability there, and then get them really focusing on what needs to happen for you to complete the work you have to do. Never mind, I don't like you, and you said that, and I said that, and somebody said the other thing, and we're not doing this, and they're not doing their weight, or all that other stuff that goes around. What needs to happen right now to get this assignment done? So that's the very first level of security they need, that there is a path for us to succeed. Because when they're in that conflict, there's a sense of hopelessness, and we're up against a wall, and we're not going to get this assignment done, and we're going down. Right? That's often the dynamic that's happening and the feeling that's going on when they're up against a deadline and conflict. So if I can help them see a path of getting the work done to the extent that they need to do it, and they can see that path, then I will often stop the conflict resolution process right there and say, okay, are they stable enough to do the work, and can they get through it without doing damage to one another, and will they be in a position to successfully complete the assignment? And that often means focusing on the structure. I'll often work backwards from the timeline. You have to have it done now, at this date. This is where you are right now. What are all the different steps that have to happen in between? As I said before when I started, these are project management teams. So I apply project management principles. What needs to happen? What are the roles? What are the outcomes? What are the deadlines? What's the quality standard that you're aiming for? If we can answer those and create something of an approach and a process, then they need to do it. More often than not, they become accountable to that, because now that the team coach is involved, it's a public dispute. It's not a private one within the team where they're not necessarily accountable to each other. Now they've become accountable to the team coach because they agreed to do this in my presence. And so it creates a higher level of accountability for them, and they virtually every time manage to successfully complete. There's the occasional ones up here where I made the wrong choice and didn't put them in the place they needed to be, and it cycled back and they struggled. So I help them understand how they can get through to complete the assignment. The second thing that I do is help them understand that even if they fail the assignment, and I'm not saying they should, even if they fail the assignment and the value of the assignment is, say, 20% of their grade, or even 30%, which is the high end, that's 3 cents on the dollar, or 30 cents on the dollar, right? For whatever grade they're getting, they're not losing 100% of their grade, they're losing a portion of it. So unless they're absolutely focused on getting that A+ and maintaining that 95% grade, and most of our students aren't that kind of student. Some of them are. We'll talk about that with type A's if we get there. But if they can understand that their vulnerability is lower than they think it is, because they feel very vulnerable in that conflict, very vulnerable to their own outcomes as a student, what they want to achieve, why they're here, to get this degree, to get, right? So if you can lessen that vulnerability, then they're able to let go a little bit of why this conflict is not as significant or as huge as they might think it is in the moment. So I can reduce that for them as well. At that point, as I said, if they're up against a timeline, off you go. If they're not up against a timeline, that is, they're just coming, oftentimes I'll get a team that comes to me after they've put in the assignment and they're going, we can't do this again, we need help. So then I'll go through a process, and the process that I use over and over, and it's in the book, and I'm not plugging the book. I'm just saying I did it so often that it's become a pattern that I've seen successful, is really 6 steps. So the first step is just helping them prepare, like asking them to reflect on what's going on for them. What's happening? What do you feel the conflict is about? What's your experience of it? Spend some time reflecting on it, prepare for the meeting. The second one is saying, okay, let's identify what the issues are. What are the things that are happening that are impacting this team's ability to be successful? Well, people aren't accountable, we're disagreeing with each other, Lane's a big jerk, whatever that is, right? So think about it, let's identify what those issues are. After that, I say, okay, so what were your expectations around, say, preparation? Lane shows up at meetings, he's never prepared. That's an accountability issue. What are your expectations about preparation? Let's talk about that. So as a team, we talk about it. Well, we expect people to have read the work. We expect people to have thought about it a little bit and come prepared with an idea. We expect people to be ready to talk. Okay, let's mark that down. So now we have the issue, we have the expectations. The next question is, what is happening that's preventing you from achieving this explanation? Well, Lane isn't doing his work when he shows up. Okay, Lane, what's happening for you that's keeping you from being properly prepared? Well, I didn't realize we had to do that. I thought we could just show up and talk. I'm better processor verbally. Okay, let's talk about that. Let's share the experience. Let's assess what are the behaviors that might need to change, or what are the expectations that might need to change in order to be aligned with the existing behavior, if that behavior is reasonable. So what are the expectations? What's getting in the way? What can we agree to in order to move forward? And let's document that. So that's in effect the process that I go through. What are the issues? What are the expectations around those issues? What's getting in the way of meeting those expectations? What behaviors need to change in order to facilitate either meeting the expectations, or what expectations need to change in order to be normalized? Because here's another thing. Sometimes people have expectations that are unreasonable. I want to get an A. How many teams get A's? A small number. How many students get A's? Same number, right? So if you expect to get an A and you have a team full of B students, is that a reasonable expectation? Probably not. So why do you want an A? Let's talk about that. So again, it really is about exploring what's going on, what's getting in the way of them meeting expectations. You talk about quick resolution. If they're up against a deadline, the quick resolution is a process for completion, then a commitment to talk afterwards. If it's not up against the deadline, you probably want to take a little more time. It might not be a lot of your time, but you want to get them to spend a little more time thinking about it and reflecting on it before you start to dig in. These meetings are usually about an hour long. So if you're wondering how quick can you do that, an hour is not much time to try and resolve a conflict with a team. And sometimes I'll have 2 or 3 meetings. They won't like it. They got other things they'd rather do. So you have to help them understand that by spending time and investing in this team now, they're going to save themselves a lot of time on the back end continuing to deal with the dysfunction. And so those are kind of the steps that I do related to conflict resolution. Questions on that before I go on? So that, I don't know if that addressed the question that you had or what you wanted to hear, but if you have any further questions or you'd like to dig in a little bit deeper into that question of conflict resolution.
What if you have people that don't really like to collaborate? They like to work independently. That's how they work best.
Okay, then great question. So people that don't like to collaborate. This is back to expectations. I don't want to sit in a room and edit a document every time we have to edit a document, or I don't want to have to write things together. I work best on my own. That's the introverts in the room. And they are probably about a third of the cohorts in the business programs. Every program is a little different, but they're a significant body. So as a team, you can say, well, how do you break down the work? How do you organize yourselves to complete the work? If somebody prefers to do work on their own, then what you need to do is segment a piece of the work so that they can take it and effectively go do that. You need to do that for everybody. An individual puts a finger on the keyboard. Teams create ideas, they build knowledge. Individuals write work, write reports. Or, and 5 people might submit something, but it's still writing is an individual act. So how can you segment the work that gives that person the time they need to work on individually, but also convince them that you need them to be a participant in the collaborative approach, but where's the value? Even for someone that likes to do work on their own, there is value in exchanging ideas or in coming to a common understanding about what we need to do. And so it's helping them buy into it, but also giving them some of what they want. For teams to be successful, everybody in the team has to get their own needs met. It's not just about meeting everybody's needs, it's about also getting my own needs met. And so it's finding that balance, it's negotiation.
I read a great article recently about the forming of teams, and that you do a survey about who likes to work on teams, who doesn't. Mm-hmm. Those that are independent workers put them together on a team and they become the highest performing team. Because they're with like-minded people and they're better at breaking up the tasks and getting on with it.
So that's an interesting point, right? And it runs into my own twisted sense of why are we here? If we're here to learn, then it shouldn't be easy. So if you want to work independently, guess what? You should work collaboratively so you can understand what that's like and not just work to your strength. Now, I also agree with you that putting like-minded people together can create a more fluid, dynamic team, a more fluid, good dynamic team, but it might not necessarily give you the range of perspective that you want to look at the whole assignment, or it might not subject them to an experience where they learn something they might not otherwise learn. So I do agree with you that putting like, and they can get along and they may do the really good work, but then again, they may also miss, and they may be narrow-minded and get into groupthink. So it is a balance. It is absolutely a balance. With the BCom, they had a capstone project. They've changed it now, which was an entrepreneurial project. I allowed them to self-select. And so the experience was those teams that self-selected didn't do much better than the program select teams because they selected people they like to work with, but that didn't translate into quality. And so there is that constant tension between the ease of the experience and the learning that you get. And one of my professors said a long time ago, there's no comfort in the learning zone and there's no learning in the comfort zone. And so I really believe that's true with the teams, is they need to be a little bit uncomfortable, but they're not so much that they aren't able to be successful. So, and that raises the question of how do you form teams? And I don't know if that got many votes, but it's a whole other subject that if we have time, we can get into. So great point. Other questions around conflict? Yeah.
Just related to that, and I think we all agree, one thing we have to stress is learners have to take a learning orientation towards this whole thing, right? They're here to learn, so we put them in difficult situations so they can learn, they develop the skills.
And that's that framing the why.
Right.
Yeah.
So how do you do that? Not just giving a lecture, or how do you actually set up that parameters to set them on that mindset?
So I'm going to get you to hold that because it's a great question, but it's not necessarily related to the conflict piece. So, or is it? I'm not seeing that connection really. Or is it more so why is it worth it to engage in the conflict?
I guess why we can wait until later.
Okay. I just want to see how. So we got some votes. I will get to that. All right. So don't despair. But I think that's a great question. Any other questions around conflict and conflict resolution?
Just a quick one. Do you ever kind of speak to the students about the value of the actual learning to work in teams against the learning to be successful on the academic piece as well as a way of managing the conflict?
I do. Yeah, so, and this is connected, right? So if they understand the why are we in teams, then it's a bit easier to get them to be willing to engage in the conflict. Because for the student proposition is, I don't have time for this. I got work to do. So if you can help them understand a couple of things. One is, by engaging in this conflict now and resolving your issues, you are setting yourself up for success in the future. This is not your only assignment. This is not your only team. This is not the only work you're going to do. I don't know about the other programs, but the MBAs work together for 6 months, and most of our programs do. So if you don't resolve this conflict, then you're probably going to be in a cycle of repeating it over and over again. So the why to engage in conflict is to save yourself time in the back end and to stop having to suffer. I tell them that suffering is optional. And some of them accept that and some of them don't. Right? Some of them choose to suffer. And you know what? That's also a student choice. Many teams will choose to suffer low-grade conflict because they don't want to invest the time to deal with it. And that's a choice that they make. And there's no reason, you can't stop them from making that choice if that's what they choose to do.
Student requests to leave the team due to conflicts that have arisen. How do you effectively handle that as a professor and instructor?
Thank you. Good question. So the short answer is tough luck. Now, the long answer is there's a student rights and responsibilities. So if the behavior of team members is going against the student rights and responsibilities, then we have an issue and we need to resolve it. And if it reaches a point where it's affecting their ability to be safe in the program, then we have occasionally had to make a hard choice to remove somebody from a team, not because of academic reasons, not even because they said they wanted to get out, but because the dynamic within the team is such that it's eroded to the point where they can no longer safely work together. The relationships have deteriorated. It's very rare, it does happen. And as a team coach, we have to be mindful of what is the student experience and are we subjecting them to a stress that's beyond what is reasonable. And sometimes the intervention is not on the person that's feeling stress, it's the person that's causing that stress, because we get bullies. Well, we call them other things, but bullies is probably as good as we can do for here. And they also have to modify their behavior in order for the teams to be successful. And so the intervention is on both sides of that.
To avoid conflict, from the very beginning, do you have like a set of exercises, like here how they introduce themselves? Or something
I do.
like that?
So in the team building, so I'm going to actually move to strategies for team effectiveness, because that's the next on the list, and it incorporates a lot of that question. So in the team building that I did, and I cannot speak for the other team coaches, because much like faculty, we all have our own approaches to doing it. We're doing the same thing, we're trying to get the same ends, but we do it a little bit differently, and that's nothing wrong with that. That diversity is healthy. What I've done in the years, and I remember I talked about the movement from starting with one theory and now moving into other things, I talk about 5 things in the team building. So there are 5 key factors that help make teams successful. One of them is leadership. Looking at my list. Okay, that's not on the list, so I'll talk about it. And I mentioned this, it's not about who's the leader, it's about the leadership function, facilitating meetings, managing time, organizing assignments, coordinating with one another. So you need to have effective leadership. I have them as teams talk about how do you want to manage leadership? What's your perspective? What do you want to do? Define the role of leader for your team. Not who's the leader, what's the role? And again, it's a spectrum. The leader can be delegative, telling people what to do, or the leader can be facilitative, which encourages them to talk. Now, you know which one I prefer. I motivate them to facilitative leadership, but under a time crunch, when things are tight and they've got a lot of assignments, they will often default to you do this, you do this, you do that. If they haven't negotiated that role, then the response is, well, who are you telling me what to do? Or people avoid those conversations because nobody's been tasked with that role. Nobody's been given permission to take over. And so they tap dance around leadership, and it causes all sorts of problems. So I have them talk about leadership. I have them talk about trust. What does trust mean to you? What are the behaviors that build trust for you when it comes to teamwork, and what are the behaviors that will erode trust? So let's be really explicit about what will cause you to lose trust in me. Because if I don't know that my behavior is going to make you lose trust, I can do that and you'll stop trusting me and I'll have no idea what happened. So I make them go to explicit conversation. What does trust mean? How do you want to approach it? How are you going to deal with it if you start to lose trust in one of your team members? What's your expectation? Remember, back to expectations and behaviors. The third conversation is conflict. I use Thomas Kilmann, TKI. Anybody here know TKI? It's a really quick and easy instrument. I don't even ask them to do it. I just talk about there are 5 different conflict styles. There is avoidance, there's accommodation, there's collaboration, there's compromise, and there's compete. So I talk about what those are, and again, I have them at their table saying, how do you approach conflict? What do you need in order to engage in healthy conflict? What do you need from your team members? What do your team members need from you in order to help support them? If you're in conflict and you're an avoider, and avoiders go, yeah, sorry, see you, I'm out of here. What do you need from your team to make sure you can stay in the group and not just get out? Right? So I have them in explicit conversations about that. So leadership, trust, conflict. The other conversation I have them in, I don't start with this because the reality is when student teams come together, especially in Res 1, they don't even know what we're asking them to do. They know they have to do some assignments, but they don't understand what it is. So I don't ask them to come to agreements on things like how they're going to manage tasks until they've actually got their tasks and they can look at it. And then I ask them to build structures. Structures are what's the process that they're going to use to work through the material. How do they go step by step from we just got an assignment to we're submitting it. And so I talk to them about structure. I also give them a structure that I've built over the years and said, here's an approach, not the approach. Here's an approach, and then now talk about it. Talk together about how you're going to handle assignments, how you're going to handle editing. Editing is a big source of conflict. If I spent 5 hours writing my portion and I submit it to the editor and they cross out half of it or get rid of it or change it, and they don't have permission from me to do that, I'm probably going to be a little upset. Right? And so I have them talk about what are your expectations around the structure of putting together an assignment. Not who's doing what, not what I want you to do, but just let's define the role and come to common understanding. And then finally, I have them talk about quality. I present to them what a quality standard is for an academic program. And that means that you have to be able to be prepared. You have to have in-depth conversation. You have to support your arguments. We teach the pyramid approach to writing in the MBA, and so I help them understand that quality is good writing. And how do you achieve that together as a team? I give them steps and help them, and then I have them talk together about what's their quality standard. Are you trying to get an A? Are you trying to get a B? How do you manage quality? What does that look like for you? Because if I say quality is you submit to the team assignment something that is completely edited, formatted, spell checked, everything, that's quality. And somebody else says, well, I thought we would just give our rough material in together and then talk about it. So you just submitted a poor quality piece of work as far as I'm concerned. If we didn't talk about it, now I think that you're not a good student because your work is poor quality, because I had a different standard. So again, and you'll notice a thread here. In every single one of these key pieces, strategies for team effectiveness, the only way to do it from my perspective is to introduce the concept and the theory. I'll often tell some stories about my own experiences and then have the teams having a conversation about that directly and coming to some understanding and agreement around what those terms mean to them and what their plans are, which ultimately, when you document all 5 of those things, that's a team charter. That's a team contract. We agree that in order to be effective, this is our plan for dealing with conflict. This is how we're going to build trust. This is how we're going to build our structure, how we're going to work through assignments. This is what we think quality is. And I also have them talking about, what's your purpose here together as a team? What do you want to get out of this experience? Do you want to learn a lot? Do you just want to get the great grade? Do you want to make it easy? What do you want? What's your goal together as a team outside of, I want to graduate from the program? So those are kind of the pieces that I put into place in terms of how do you build team effectiveness, is giving them the time to talk about key factors that influence their success. Questions about that? I don't know if that answers your question. That was a really long answer to a question. Any other questions around that? Yeah, here and then Tammy.
Does the majority of conflict arise because those steps weren't taken to the level that you would want?
Yeah, that's a great question. The reason I came to those steps is because most of the teams that I found that were in trouble, it was usually as a result of one of those 5 things. And when I looked at teams that did really, really well, they were doing those things. So leadership, for example, most of the time, and only until recently, did I even talk about leadership. And then people are like, well, we don't need to have a boss, we're all peers. Yeah, that's right, but you need some things in place. And if you don't agree to those, you're going to run into trouble. If nobody's coordinating your actions, if nobody has permission to move things forward, it takes a lot of time and a lot of swirl to get there. And so, yeah, I lost track of your question there, sorry. That answered it?
Yeah.
Okay, Tammy?
Actually, a great bit of teamwork was going on online here. They actually answered their own question. One of the questions was actually answered by a group of people on the online chat, so we don't have a question anymore.
Can you share what their question and answer was?
Sure. The question was about what were the 5 conflicts that you were mentioning earlier.
Okay.
And so, yeah, we've got the answer online now.
Awesome. Any other questions?
Can we talk a bit about the team charters with respect to strategies for team effectiveness? I was working with a team and their charter wasn't working for them. And so I encouraged them to work together as a team, and that it's okay to adjust that if it's not working. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, great question. So a couple of points on that, and I've done this in a number of different ways. Techniques that don't work. One is asking them to create a team charter on the 2nd day of their residence. Doesn't work. What do you get? Pollyanna. We're going to love each other and respect each other and do everything collaboratively, and it's going to be awesome. Yeah, not enough. So I actually don't, I don't ask them to build their charters until after they've completed a body of work. So they can now see how do we function versus how we thought we could function, and now let's create some what is really happening instead of what we think it ought to be. Back to your question though, how do you deal with a team when their charter is not working for them? One of 2 things needs to change. Either their behavior needs to change so they can act in accordance to their charter, or their charter needs to change so that it's consistent with their behavior. If they feel like their behavior is still allowing them to move forward on their team, then the charter should reflect that. If, for example, they say we're going to show up for every meeting prepared and somebody's not showing up prepared, well then we need to deal with that behavior, about what needs to change with that person's behavior so they're meeting the expectation of we're going to be prepared. And I just use that as an example. So, I've mentioned this over and over, I really hone in on let's talk about behavior. Let's not talk about the judgments you're making about that behavior, other than to unpack it and understand why there's conflict, but let's actually talk about what's the behavior that needs to change or the behavior that's impacting your ability to get there. And back to the charter, so we said we're going to do this, but we're doing this. What needs to happen to make that bridge? That's back to how do we bridge the gap between expectations and current behavior? Does that answer it?
I think you addressed it with the timing perspective too,
Yeah.
because in that particular course, they were being asked to do their charter in their pre-res work, where they really didn't know each other,
No.
right?
Yeah, now I still get pushback. Well, I used to get pushback from the students. I still have to deal with the fact that I'm not actively doing this as much anymore. I know, I'm in mourning. I've done it, I've been all across the spectrum, and now in the MBAs, for example, they don't even submit their charters till after the residence. So they've had some time to stop and pause and reflect, and they've still got 6 months of working together. I get pushback from people saying, why don't we do our charter in week 1? And when I had it all in week 1, I got pushback saying, why don't we do it later? So with so many of these choices when it comes to teamwork, in fact, pretty much every one of them in many ways, you can do this or you can do that. Each of those approaches has merit. And unless you can find a way to combine them both, you have to decide which one you're going to do. Charters in week 1, charters in week 3. So you have to make a choice, and you have to accept that there's good arguments for doing it a different way, but this is the way we're choosing to do it.
Can I just add something to that? I'm Trish Dick, for those of you who don't know me, and I've been working with the MBAs right now, and one of the things we talked about when we were talking about team charters was that it's a living document, that as people get to know each other, and as Lane has clearly put out, as you work through different pieces of work, as you go through, that some of those points on your team charter might need to be revisited because they're not working. That it's not this static document to be filed on some shelf and never referred to. It needs to be part of what it is that makes you a great team, and that's probably going to differ depending on the personalities, depending on the structure that they decided. I really encourage them to make it a living document.
And further to that point, if there's a team in conflict and they're coming for help, I pull out their charter. What does their charter say? More often than not, it doesn't say anything at all about what they're in conflict about, so then we need to create a new addendum to the charter. Or it might, and then we'll look at it and say, well, you said this. The other thing is so most teams are together for 6 months. Typically they're together for a set of courses, and then there's a bit of a break and then another set of courses before they change teams. In that break in between, I do check-in. I say, now is the time to get together and talk about it. Are we living what we expected? Do we need to change our charter? Do we need to change our behavior in order to be successful in the next round of assignments that we're doing? So I asked them to bring that up and have that circular conversation on a fairly regular basis, just to make sure that it is a living document. Yep.
When you look at the charters altogether, is there one that is most frequently and effectively appearing in most of them?
Well, the one thing that comes up, and it drives me crazy all the time, is we say we agree to treat each other with respect. That one drives me nuts, because what does that mean? We won't interrupt each other, we won't, it could be anything. And so the biggest challenge, the best charters describe their agreements behaviorally. The worst charters describe them conceptually. So I push for behavior. So the best charters, now, I also give them a template and say you need to have agreements on, and it's those 5 factors that I talked about, plus their goals. I don't always call them those, I frame them a little bit differently, but basically I say you need to have agreements on these key pieces. And those typically cover most of the things that they get into trouble with. And of course, they're very inventive at finding new ways to get in trouble, and then I learn something new and add it to the list. So that's why 10 years of doing this has been really helpful. Other questions around strategies for effectiveness? And I'm going to include that team charters in that because we kind of talked about that. By the way, if any of you have short-term teams, that is, we're just together for a course or we're just together for a project, I very rarely ask them to do a team charter. I do ask them to have the conversations that are key conversations to have. I don't ask them to submit a team charter because there simply isn't enough value add in documenting it, because they're going to do one project and they're done and off they go. So for example, in our MBAs, and I know I'm being MBA centric because it's just most common in my mind, they do a 3-week second res where they are very intensely together. We don't do team charters. They've been around for long enough that they understand what's necessary. They do have conversations around coming to agreement, but they don't actually have to go to the point of documenting it and submitting it because there's just not enough additional value there. So you have to weigh, and is the value there? Are they going to be together for long enough that it's worth doing that or not? Likewise, if they're having a conflict on the last assignment that they have together as a team, I probably don't ask them to reevaluate their charter. I just help them try and figure out how to get through that crisis, because then they're going to move on and they'll get a fresh new team. And I do ask them to reflect on what worked and what didn't, so when they build their next team, they can keep that experience alive and make sure they don't have the same problem again. So that's useful that way. Other questions about that?
Okay, I have
Yeah.
another one. Sorry.
Okay.
I work in the MAZE program. So
Yeah.
we have students that join other programs for a particular course and then leave.
Yes, so they're not very invested in the whole cohort, are they?
Well, they are for that time period,
Yeah.
I would hope. But I just find it interesting if they're joining an existing team that perhaps has a team charter.
So
What the approach is that.
really quickly, we do have people, I call them drop-ins. So somebody left the program and now they're coming back and they have to pick up a course in order to be able to move forward, so they're just there for that little while. I give the teams direction to help to share with that person their charter and to have a conversation to help that person understand how they work. Almost inevitably, and I can't even think of a handful of instances in 10 years where it was different, the person joining the team will conform to their norms, because those norms already exist, and it's just that's how we tend to interact as people, is that's what's going on, okay, I'm going to find a way. Unless there's something really, really difficult in that dynamic, they'll usually conform to that norm. And it's sometimes a good chance for teams to review how they're working before a new person comes in, so they can deal with their stuff before a new person comes along. So there's an opportunity there too. Any other questions around that? I want to talk about assessing. Assessing is hard. It's really hard to assess team performance. So if you're an instructor and you're watching how a team is interacting in the room, then be aware that what you're watching is theater. It's not real. They're performing for you. And now that doesn't mean they're ineffective, and if they're a really high functioning team and that's just the way they work, that's great, but if they're not, they're going to hide it. So you have to watch really carefully. In fact, if you want to watch how a team really does work, give them a specific deliverable that they have to accomplish in that limited amount of time, and then watch how they accomplish it. And you'll begin to see those threads. But I can't count the number of times where they've talked and they were nice to each other, then they left and I left, and you can hear loud noises coming from the room of discontent. But they won't show that to you because they're afraid that their grade will be affected. So observing process is not necessarily an indicator of team success, good team dynamics. So you have to ask questions and dig in a little bit if you really want to know. Also, asking for peer feedback can be challenging because there's rater bias. I don't like you because you look like my brother and I don't like my brother. And so now I don't like you and I'm going to rate you badly because I don't really like you that much. You, on the other hand, your work isn't very good, but we get along really well, so you're going to get a good rating from me. So the validity of those responses is challenging. So you have to be very careful what questions you're asking and how you use that information to quantify, if you're going to quantify that information to apply to their work. Where feedback works the best is when it's formative. When you can help them engage in a formative approach where they can give each other developmental feedback that does not affect their grade, then you're much more likely to get real, positive, solid information. If they feel there's grade-based vulnerability, they will act to protect it. And that's the challenge of assessment. And so ultimately at Royal Roads, for the most part, what we assess is the final product, the written document or the presentation. I actually believe, and this is something that I probably didn't do enough of while I was here, but it's something that I've recognized since I left, is that in my mind, the ideal team assignment capitalizes on the value of team-based learning. So where's the value in team-based learning? Where's the real meat for a team? It's not in writing a report. It's in the process. So if you really want to emphasize that the process is important to us and we're giving a value to it, as opposed to the end product, then give the teams an assignment where they have to do something together. They have to report on not what they achieved, but how they got it, because that's the important information. So describe what you analyzed, why you analyzed it, who analyzed what, how you looked at this information collaboratively, and how you reached the results you got. That's the more important question than, is it the right recommendation and did you support it with evidence? Because ultimately, and this is true, and I hate to say this because some people disagree, any individual on a team could do the team assignment by themselves, and they could probably do a pretty good job of it. So it's not about the end result. It's not about the product. It's about the process. So if you want to encourage teams to engage in good process, assess the process, not the product. ask them to reflect on their process and deliver a report or recommendations that are based on describing how they got there. It doesn't need to be the whole assignment. It should be a significant portion of it in order to get there. I'm looking at the time and wondering if we need to shut down or where are we at?
Well, we'll take a short little break. Those
Okay.
that want to, Lane, thank you.
Yeah. I'm going to hang around afterwards, so this isn't the end of it if anybody wants to stick around, but I know you all have lives, so I wish, as I said before, I could probably talk for 3 hours without any trouble, but.
So we'll do a really quick closing and just thank Lane in front of everyone. Lane came and volunteered to share today, this time today with us, and we said yes. And so thank you very much for that. I just want to point to some books on the table. Lane says they're all good, especially his.
Which I'll be selling.
But they're all mine, and if you see one that you want to borrow, just say so.
And we also I just echo what BJ said. Thank you, Lane, for making time to stop by here today. It's great to learn from your many years of experience as a team coach. And it was great timing also, BJ and the CTET team, as well as our Coaching and Counseling Center. We are launching a bit of an initiative over this fall that's going to be looking at a lot of these topics actually that were identified here. So we were thinking, yes, this is great. People have some of the same questions that we do. And so some of the things we're going to be looking at this 3-part series, specifically at assignments and assessment. And that will be coming later this fall. We'll be sharing more information about that. We're going to be working CTET again and the Coaching and Counseling Center to look at some of the team-based learning outcomes to see how we can maybe make those more effective for improving the student experience. Looking at the role of the team coach and how that can continue to develop and potentially integrate further, be a better support to faculty, staff, and to students. And develop some best practices, tools, and resources that will be available online and also through some workshops and different platforms to ensure that the information that staff, faculty, and students are looking for is available. And then did you want to maybe touch on the last
Sure, we're
one, BJ?
hoping to be able to announce very shortly that there will be a call for proposals for the Teaching with Technology grants. Do you know a date that's coming out?
The 8th, September 8th.
So watch for that. There'll be an opportunity, and the focus of those grants is working with team assignments, team activities, using technology to support those. So that's coming soon. The rest, watch for over the next month or so to hear some announcements about. And that's it. Thank you very much, Lane.
Just as a quick aside, so I've been touring around and talking to a couple different institutions about teamwork. I just got back from Algonquin College yesterday. Royal Roads is way ahead of the curve. Way ahead of the curve in terms of what we do and how we approach teamwork and how we approach team-based learning. So in spite of the challenges that we all deal with and the sometimes headaches of teams, recognize that what you're doing is actually advanced compared to what a lot of people are doing. And we've got a wealth of experience and knowledge in this institution around this area, and so be proud of what we've achieved as an institution while we're still trying to deal with the challenges that they produce. So great stuff. I'm going to hang around here for a little while, so those that need to leave, please go. And those that want to stay, I'm happy to be here, and I've got some of my books if anybody wants to buy them. I'm selling them for $15. They're 20 plus on Amazon, so save a little money. So thanks again. It was really great to be here. Great to see all of you.